The elements are really the pieces that make up a short story, come together to create the story as a whole. A short story is defined as something that tells about a single event or experience. In other words, it's not usually multiple situations. It's fictional, not true, although it may be based on something that is true. It's 500 to 15,000 words in length. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it creates an impression on the reader. It gives some sort of lesson and some sort of idea towards the reader. There are really 5 elements in any short story: setting, characterization, plot, theme, and point of view. We will be reviewing each of these individually, and remember, you need to note the definitions on your graphic organizer, and you can pause at any time. The first element we're going to discuss is setting. Setting tells the reader where and when the story takes place. For example, the setting of The Lion King would be the African savannah, probably present day, whereas the setting for Hunger Games is America, but a long time in the future. So setting really has a time and a place. If you were talking about the setting for Little House on the Prairie, that would have been in the 1800s in the United States. The second element we're going to discuss is characterization. Characterization is the creation of imaginary people who appear to be real to the reader. The author makes the characters real to the reader through several different methods, which we'll discuss more on another day. But it really is a way of making the characters come alive, either through how they're speaking, what they're doing, what they look like, that sort of thing. The writer gives information about the characters in the story to make them come alive and make the story more interesting. The third element we're going to be discussing is plot. Plot is really a series of events in which the writer reveals what is happening, to whom, and why. So the plot is really the little events in the story that lead up to make the story. We're going to discuss more about plot in a little while. Theme. Theme is often one of the most difficult of the elements to understand. It is the message that the writer intends to communicate by telling the story. For example, Beauty and the Beast. The theme might very well have been, don't judge a book by its cover. It's different from the topic. The topic of Beauty and the Beast is there is a lovely young woman who ends up falling in love with a beast. That's the topic. The message that the author of Beauty and the Beast is trying to convey is don't judge a book by its cover. Themes can't really be expressed in one word. So a theme wouldn't just be courage, but it might be courage will help you in all situations, or courage will help you in difficult situations. So the theme, like I said, is one of the most difficult elements in a book or any kind of story. A theme of Toy Story, for instance, might be that friendship can conquer all things. So we will be discussing theme at length as we go through all of our stories. And the last element is point of view. It's the position of the narrator of the story and what the writer sees from that vantage point. For instance, it could be a first-person story where it's written from the perspective of I. I went to the store. I picked up a sandwich. That's first person. Or it could be from the perspective of third person. He went to the store. He picked up a sandwich. He fell on his way out the door. That really actually is important, what point of view it's written from, because the author can reveal information or hold information back based on that point of view. And it really is a device that the authors can use to really make the story more interesting. So it's easy to identify, it's easy to tell which one is which, but it's not quite as easy to figure out why an author would use one or another. So to recap, the 5 elements of a short story are setting, the time, the where and the when of the story; characterization, how the author makes the characters come alive; plot, which is the series of events that the characters go through; theme, which is the message of the story, or sometimes it's a moral; point of view, the way the story is told, whether it's told from the first person, I or me, or third person, he or she. These 5 elements make up the short story. However, one of the elements, plot, has some elements of its own. Plot, in particular, has some pieces to it as well that we will be learning about and going into more detail about this year. Plot has 4 elements. Exposition, which is a word you may or may not be familiar with; conflict, climax, and resolution. There are also a couple of other things in there which we will discuss, but these are the parts of the plot. And remember, the plot is an element of the short story. These are the elements of plot. So as we discussed, the plot is the series of events through which the writer shows you what is happening, to whom, and why. So it's really the action in the story, the things that happen in the story. Plot can kind of be diagrammed on a plot diagram. You may have done this last year. In a plot diagram, the exposition is the part that really sets up the story. The rising action is the series of conflicts as the story builds. The conflicts are all part of the rising action. The climax is the part of greatest tension in the story. It's kind of the turning point. It's the part of the most excitement, and it's not always easy to tell, but it's the part of most excitement after which everything changes in the story. The conflicts are resolved. The falling action comes after the climax and is when things start to fall off a little bit. It kind of tells you what's happened after the climax. And the resolution is how all of the conflicts have been resolved in the story. Sometimes they're solved, sometimes they're not. But it is really the way the story is wrapped up, the resolution. So in particular, exposition. It sets the stage for the story. It often contains setting or characterization. So usually in the exposition somewhere will be the setting of the story. It can be sometimes just in the first couple of lines. And it will have a little bit of introduction about the characters. So the characters will also be developed throughout the story, but in the beginning it tells you a little bit about those characters. That is the exposition in the beginning of the story. Conflict. It's a problem in the story that needs to be resolved. There can be more than one conflict in the story, and we'll discuss the different types of conflicts as we come along, but it's really the problem that needs to be solved. The rising action is the series of conflicts or events that engage the reader, that move along the action, that kind of get you to where the conflicts are resolved. So it's really the series of conflicts along the way. The climax is when the action comes to its highest point of conflict. So everything is kind of built to this one big point, and everything is very tense, and you're not exactly sure what's going to happen next. That's the climax. That's the climax when things right afterwards then will become resolved. Falling action are the events that occur after the climax. It's usually a wrap-up. Now the thing to remember, some stories have very little falling action. Some have really none at all. But in any event, it's usually not the bulk of the story. It's usually a very small part of the story. And finally, there's the resolution. The story's action after the climax until the end of the story. It's really how the story is wrapped up. It's the conclusion of the story. It's how everything, all the problems are resolved. Hence the word resolution. How everything is resolved. So the elements of plot are exposition, rising action, conflict, climax, falling action, and resolution. On the back of your graphic organizer, I would like for you to draw and label a plot diagram with all of the parts, with the exposition, the rising action, the conflict, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution.